today on Ag News Daily.
So through the local foods movement, I just noticed that, we could really captivate local beef into our school without necessarily the grant process, because we know that's coming to an end. So I wanted to look like, well, what does the sustainability of this look like, and how can we continue this program on once the funding is over?
Welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. May is a month full of celebrating.
Yeah, Beef Month. I can't believe it's May already, though, too.
It's also Mental Health Awareness Month, so I think I'm going to work on my mental health by enjoying a steak.
Mm-hmm.
We did see a lot of weather. We had heavy rainfall once again impact parts of the central and eastern U.S. this week, although coverage remained scattered outside of a few core areas. Heavy to excessive rainfall had more than 2 inches of rain, soaking parts of the plains in the Mississippi Valley and the upper southeast. Isolated storms also hit the Great Lakes region in the Ohio Valley and the Carolinas, the northeast and parts of the northern Rockies. In portions of the plains where rainfall was more widespread, drought conditions did show a noticeable improvement. In the southern plains, the stalled front brought heavy rain and eased the drought in those areas as well, but began triggering localized flooding and severe storms. While this rain is beneficial for drought relief, especially in Kansas and Nebraska, some areas may have still missed out. Nebraska, in particular, might see less rain despite several chances in the upcoming forecast. A strong system brought heavy rain and severe weather to the Midwest, with another round expected today, which is Friday, into the weekend. Forecast models suggest this upcoming system may stall out over the eastern U.S. into next week, keeping the showers in the forecast through the weekend, possibly delaying spring work and efforts in some of those areas. Delaney?
Yeah, I think we're going to get to a point where farmers are faced with the decision, do I just try to get the crop in, or is it important to maybe wait and see if these storms shift? But U.S. corn and soybean planting is picking up pace, moving ahead of the 5-year average, surprisingly. According to the USDA, 24% of the nation's corn crop is now in the ground, slightly ahead of typical 22% of this time. About 5% of the corn is emerged, also running a bit ahead of average. Soybean planting is also progressing quickly, 18% planted compared to the 5-year norm of 12%. As for winter wheat, 49% of the crop is rated good to excellent condition. That's a 4-point improvement over last week, and 27% of the crop has headed ahead of the usual 22%. Spring wheat planting is also moving faster than normal. 30% is in the ground compared to 21% typically, with 5% already emerged, right on pace. And according to Brad Suma, director of the Heartland Regional Office of the National Agricultural Statistics Service, he says the season is off to a fairly average start with some mixed weather. He notes that while dry conditions from last fall raised concerns, recent rainfall has helped soil moisture levels certainly rebound, which we could absolutely use heading into this main growing season.
That's right. We saw some more news on E15. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, is issuing an emergency waiver to allow nationwide sales of E15 fuel during the busy summer season, going into effect yesterday as of May 1st. Typically, E15 is restricted for about half of the country from May through September due to air quality regulations. The temporary waiver, though, lifts that ban for this year. The EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin says the move reflects President Trump's ongoing commitment to the farmers and to strengthening the renewable fuel standard. In response, many agricultural groups shared their positive comments, including Growth Energy CEO Emily Score, praised the decision, saying it brings price relief to drivers and the stability to the fuel market, stating EPA's decision will put more American fuel in the marketplace. Score also added it will allow Americans to spend less on their hard-earned money at the pump this summer. USDA Agricultural Secretary Brooke Rollins also weighed in, saying the waiver is needed to boost corn farmers facing rising input costs, stating the cost of inputs for our farmers went up about 30%, she says, adding a lot of that was driven by the cost of energy. So as we bring energy down, that affects everyone in hopefully a really productive and positive way. I think as much as anyone, it will help our ag community. Secretary Rollins says expanding access to E15 also advances the administration's goal of U.S. energy independence, not just through fossil fuels, but through biofuels and other renewables like timber and biomass.
Well, Tanner, switching tracks here, Still talking EPA, they've released their final insecticide strategy earlier this week on April 29th, aimed at protecting more than 900 federally endangered and threatened species, while still supporting America's growers. The new strategy outlines practical mitigation measures that the EPA will consider when registering new insecticides or reviewing existing ones. These steps are designed to reduce risk to species listed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin says the plan strikes a balance between conservation and agricultural needs, stating, quote, "We have found common sense ways to keep endangered species that won't place unneeded burdens on the growers who rely on these tools for their livelihood." He added, quote, "We're committed to making sure the ag community has what it needs to protect the food supply from pests and disease." The agency says it will continue working with stakeholders and make updates as new data becomes available.
That's right. And we saw leaders of the National Corn Grower Association say that they were disappointed in the decision by the U.S. International Trade Commission that could lead to shortages of key herbicides used by corn farmers. The commission's ruling, issued on April 29th, determined that Corteva Agriscience was harmed by imports of the herbicide 2,4-D. That decision paves the way for U.S. Department of Commerce to impose duties on those imports, with final rates to be determined at a later date. Illinois farmer and NCGA President Kenneth Hartman Jr. says the ruling is alarming, stating that corn growers should not be forced to rely exclusively on one domestic supplier, and today's decision threatens to cause significant availability shortages for 2,4-D. He added that the U.S. farmers are already under pressure from high input costs and lower commodity prices. The herbicide 2,4-D is a vital tool for controlling broadleaf weeds, one of the most difficult challenges that corn growers face each growing season.
Yeah, certainly hope not to see that tool get removed from the toolbox. Here's an interesting headline, though. The U.S. government dropped all criminal charges earlier this week against South Dakota ranchers Charles and Heather Maud, ending a legal battle that drew national attention. The Mauds were indicted last June after the U.S. Forest Service alleged they had illegally used federal land adjacent to their property near the Buffalo Gap National Grasslands. The dispute began after a complaint claimed a fence on the Maud property blocked public access. A survey was conducted, but the Mauds say they never received the results before being indicted by a federal grand jury. This week, U.S. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins announced that the charges have been dismissed. Rollins said that, quote, "We must ensure our farmers and ranchers are not targeted for living the American way of life." She called this case an example of government overreach and has said that President Trump has directed the USDA to address similar situations to those of the Mauds. The USDA has also launched a new portal for farmers, ranchers, and other USDA customers to report concerns if they believe they've been unfairly targeted by federal action. So certainly an interesting turn of events there, Tanner.
I think my federal taxes are unfairly targeting me. I need to get a hold of them. In a local meat processing news headline, a bipartisan bill aimed at supporting small meat and poultry processors is back on the table in Washington, which was announced earlier this week on Tuesday, April 29th. Senators John Thune of South Dakota and Tina Smith of Minnesota have reintroduced the Strengthening Local Processing Act. The legislation is designed to help small processors upgrade their operations and improve food safety planning. The bill would expand access to critical resources, including training, technical assistance, grants, and support for selling inspector-approved meat products across state lines. Senator Thune says that the bill will help local processors meet that growing consumer demand and create more marketing opportunities that are closer to home. Senator Smith, whose state leads the nation in turkey production, says the strong processing sector is vital to the farm economy, stating that right now only a handful of large companies dominate this industry. This legislation will provide a level playing field for small operators to compete.
We're going to talk more about small operators here in just a little bit, but a few more headlines before we do. The U.S. and Mexico reached an agreement on how to handle a damaging livestock pest called New World screwworm, announced earlier this week on April 30th. Reuters says the agreement was reached only after Secretary Rollins threatened to limit Mexican cattle imports coming through the southern U.S. border. This pest, which was eradicated in the U.S. back in 1966, has reemerged in Mexico and can cause severe and often fatal damage to livestock, wildlife, and in rare case humans. Screwworm flies lay larvae that burrow into the skin of living animals, making rapid containment critical. That sounds unpleasant, to say the least, Tanner. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said last week that her government is increasing prevention and control efforts, but still U.S. ranchers are calling for more aggressive action. The U.S. typically imports over 1 million Mexican cattle each year, vital supply for an American herd that's already at its lowest level in decades. Imports were previously halted from November of 2024 to February of 2025 after the screwworm outbreak was confirmed.
Yeah, the headline when that email came across our inboxes was misleading. I thought there was going to be a bigger win with Mexico. Still an important one. We also saw a dozen states are suing the Trump administration over his tariff policies, calling it unlawful and economically damaging, according to the AP. The lawsuit filed in the U.S. Court of International Trade in New York challenges former President Trump's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or the IEEPA, to impose tariffs. The states argue the law does not give the president broad authority to act unilaterally on trade, and such powers rest with Congress. The plaintiffs include Oregon, Arizona, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois, Maine, Minnesota, Nevada, New Mexico, New York, and Vermont. According to the suit, President Trump's tariff actions will have been driven by the whims rather than lawful authority and failed to meet the law's requirement of unusual, extraordinary threat from abroad. The states are asking the court to declare the tariffs illegal and prevent federal agencies from enforcing them.
Yeah, the one question I have here is this lawsuit in reference to Trump 1.0 or Trump 2.0?
Says former President Trump, according to the written article.
Yeah. While China's grain supply is not expected to suffer despite a drop in U.S. feed grain and oilseed imports, officials say the country has ample reserves and access to alternative global suppliers. The world's largest buyer of soybeans is set to receive a massive shipment of oilseeds from South America in the second quarter here. More than 30 million tons are expected to arrive from April to June, primarily from Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. These shipments are helping to ease a recent supply crunch and putting downward pressure on animal feed prices, but China said they've been working to diversify their grain imports, shifting more, of course, toward South America. Part of this was some of the tariffs we saw triggered under the Trump administration, making American crops less viable. Part of this is just they have less expensive crop to offer. But analysts say key U.S. exports like corn, soybeans, and sorghum can easily be replaced with global supplies more than sufficient to meet demand. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in the market headlines section, Tanner, so I don't want to give too much away yet.
Certainly. We will look at the Rural Mainstreet Index. The index has fallen below growth neutral for the 18th time in the past 19 months, signaling that ongoing struggle in rural economies. A new report announced late last week shows a grim outlook for farm income in 2025, with only 3.7% of bankers expecting it to increase. In contrast, 63% predict it to drop compared to 2024. For the 10th time in 11 months, the index also reports a decline in farmland prices, while farmland equipment sales have dropped for the 19th consecutive month. When it comes to tariffs, only 7.5% of bank CEOs recommend returning to January 2025 tariff levels, signaling a reluctance to revisit recent trade policies. Trade data from the International Trade Association reveals a sharp decline in regional exports of agricultural goods and livestock. In January 2025, exports totaled $964.3 million, which was down 14% from $1.1 billion in January of 2024. Mexico remains that top destination for U.S. ag and livestock exports, accounting for 45% of the total regional exports in that first month of 2025.
Well, final headline here before we kick it over to our interview for today. Secretary Rollins has announced this week a second round of payments for specialty crop producers through the Marketing Assistance for Specialty Crops program. This round will provide an additional $1.3 billion in assistance for specialty crop farmers. The USDA's Farm Service Agency has already delivered nearly $900 million in first-round payments to eligible producers, but Rollins emphasized that the initiative reflects the department's commitment to supporting American farmers. Rollins also expressed gratitude for the work specialty crop producers do, highlighting their critical role in providing safe and abundant food for American families and the world. The MASC program, that's not a very creative acronym, helps producers cover marketing costs for a wide range of crops, including fresh and dried fruits, vegetables like dry edible beans and peas, mushrooms, tree nuts, and other specialty crops. So just one of many payments I'm sure we'll continue to see here come out. Well, May, of course, is Beef Month, and we're going to celebrate it all month long, eating some good steaks, but we've got a special guest to get us kicked off with May Beef Month, who started a direct-to-consumer beef business. We're chatting with Jordan Classen, who, along with her husband, started their farm back in 2016 and has seen it grown every year since. But it's not just about their business, they're also supporting others in the industry along the way. Let's dive into that great conversation now. Tanner, I'm so excited for today's conversation. We are joined today by one of my good friends, Jordan Classen, who farms with her husband out in Nebraska. We're going to talk about all the cool things they are doing on their ranch and operation. But Jordan, first of all, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Yes, of course. I'm excited to be here.
So Jordan, before we get into really the Classen cattle company that you and Travis have so diligently built over the last few years, let's talk a little bit more about your background and how you came into the industry. I think you have such a unique story as well, personally.
Yeah, so my dad is in the military, so we moved all around the United States growing up, mostly between Colorado and North Carolina. And so when I was in high school, I found my passion for agriculture because I was able to work on a roadside produce stand, and we mostly emphasized like a strawberry U-pick patch, but also had other produce as well. And so by working on that farm stand, I learned how to communicate with a lot of consumers and just kind of figured out like people do really have a lot of questions and they are curious, and it just filled a void in me that I didn't know I had. I really found a passion for ag that way and wanted to pursue that in college. So then I came to the University of Nebraska, and then that's where I met Travis, and we kind of came up with a shared vision together of his passion is the cow-calf side of the operation, and then mine is the answering people's question and getting great beef into their hands. And so we kind of sat down, and we say it's our kitchen table dream. So we sat down at the kitchen table and figured out what does that look like and what is that process. And so that's kind of how we created our direct-to-consumer beef business.
And how many years have you been running that business now?
Really heavily for the last 4 years. And before that, we started all of this in 2016. So
I love that. I actually didn't know some of that story that you shared about being in the U-pick business. I knew you had traveled around in some of that stuff, but I learned something new about you today.
Yeah, and I feel like strawberries always make people happy. So if I hit the lottery someday, then I'm just going to be a strawberry farmer.
I love that. Okay, so you and Travis sat down. You had this kitchen vision. Also didn't know that, so I kind of like how you phrased that. But how did you guys go about sitting down and coming up with this vision, but then turning it into real life? That takes a lot of time and energy and dedication. How did you guys go about building your beef business?
So we started off with the cow-calf side and just really focusing on our maternal traits of the cow-calf pairs, and building those genetics over time. And then once we got the genetics established within our herd, then we just this past year were able to completely close that loop. So we didn't use the sale barn at all. All of the cattle that were born on our farm were retained on our farm. So whether that was retained through ownership, putting them back into the cow-calf pair operation, or retained under ownership to go into our feeding program for our direct-to-consumer business. And so it just took a lot of time and math to kind of figure out like what that looks like. We started with just processing 3 head, and then just this last year we processed 56. So we're growing steadily over time, and we're seeing a lot of feedback from our consumers that they just really appreciate having high quality beef in their homes.
So tell us a little bit more about your group of consumers. Are these local friends? How are you finding the end user?
Yeah, so I'm really fortunate to love going to farmers markets. So I go to a couple farmers markets. One is on Saturdays in Bellevue, Nebraska. So it's kind of like a subset neighborhood of Omaha. And that's a really great market. It's got a lot of like small makers and things like that at it. I would like to be able to be in the Omaha market at some point, but I need to scale some more to be able to carry enough product for that one. And then in Lincoln, I go to the market. It's called the Sunday Market at College View, and it's off of 40th and Prescott in Lincoln. And that's the grocery store market of Lincoln is what it's coined and referred to as. And that's just a great market. It has a lot of produce vendors and things like that. And so we really pride ourselves on bringing high quality food into Lincoln on the Sunday in Lincoln.
But in addition to the farmers markets, Jordan, you guys are also doing, like, if somebody wants a quarter or a half or a whole, you'll work with them to do that processing and whatnot as well. And you have a physical location, or is it a storefront or just where you're working and doing all of the?
Yes. So we have a storefront. It's open on typically right now, because we're headed into the market season, I'm open on Thursdays. And so that's from 4 to 7 p.m. So people could come in and shop. This is also a place where they could come in and pick up that beef share if they wanted to, or if they just reserved any other kind of order. And then we do the markets, and we have the storefront. And then we also put some of our beef in schools as well.
In schools? Tell us more about that.
Yes. Yeah, so through the USDA, there was a grant called the Local Foods Grant, and so schools were able to take part in that. There's one more round of funding here in Nebraska for next year, so that will extend into December of 2025. But I'm able to kind of conglomerate with schools and find out what their needs are. So typically what I sell to schools is 10-pound tubes of ground beef, and then also ground beef patties. But I do have schools who want to have like a celebratory beef meal, whether that's for students who are outgoing seniors or just something to celebrate like beef month and things like that. And so sometimes I'll sell them like a custom product that they are wanting for that meal. So whether that's like sirloin tips, Philly steaks, brisket, things like that.
So you went through this process to apply for the grant so that the schools could effectively have fresh beef for the students, where a lot of the community is sending their kids as well. And then there was also an element, right, of where you're also incorporating other beef producers in the community to help sell or donate their meat to the school project as well.
Yes. So through the local foods movement, I just noticed that, we can really captivate local beef into our school without necessarily the grant process, because we know that's coming to an end. So I wanted to look like, well, what does the sustainability of this look like, and how can we continue this program on once the funding is over? And I work at Boone Central Schools here in Albion, and so we came up with a local beef program. It's modeled after Waverly School District, which is over by Lincoln. And so producers can donate their beef. We're filing for the 501c3 process right now. And so that beef will be able to, be tax exempt and everything like that, and donations as well. So we take in donations from companies or community members, and that's a monetary donation, and that goes to our processing costs. And then we take in physical donations of live animal or already processed beef. Everything just has to go through a USDA plant to be put into the school system. And so we work through that, and to kind of outline that process, essentially I worked with our food service manager to identify how much beef we go through in a year. And then I kind of filled that with producers. There's quite a few of us working on this project. And so it was really helpful to be working with people who know other people in the community. And so our hope is that, maybe every couple of years, then people come, to donate, and that we're not relying on the same producers every year, unless they wanted to, really participate every year. That's totally fine too, but just continuing to spread that out.
That's awesome. Tanner, your kids would probably flourish if they got some local beef rather than whatever the schools purchased today.
Absolutely. They both went to school with chopped up beef sticks and cheese sticks because they didn't like what was on the menu today.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Go ahead.
I like to consult with schools and just kind of talk to them about the local foods program, and then also how that might look as a sustainable program in their school moving forward. And we've seen a little bit of uncertainty here in the funding of the program in the last couple of weeks, as far as if it's going to continue to be something in the future that schools can take advantage of at the national level. But it's definitely something that can be sustainable if there's multiple farmers who come together to make it happen.
I'm curious, out of all of the ways that you distribute your beef, what's the most popular cut?
Definitely our ribeyes. Our ribeyes are a hot commodity. I was sold out of ribeyes in August last year. So if you want some Classen beef ribeyes, definitely be reaching out soon, because they fly off the shelf. And then also our Philly cheesesteak meat. It's just a different, unique cut. And so that's a quick cooked meal that you don't have to put a lot of time and effort into, and you can make French dips, Philly cheesesteaks, enchiladas. You can put it into soups, all the things. So
I'm getting hungry. Ribeye is also my favorite cut of meat, so now I'm thinking, ooh, that sounds pretty good tonight to eat for dinner.
Yes. I actually told Travis a couple weeks ago, I was like, we need to set our ribeyes aside for our own family before we start doing markets, because last year I didn't think about that, and then we sold out of them, and I was like, man, I could really use a ribeye in October.
Well, Jordan, I think it's just so unique and special what you and Travis are building, and I'm sure there are tons of other ranchers and producers that have tried something similar or in the process of setting it up for themselves. What's your biggest piece of advice if we have folks watching and are thinking they're really inspired by your story? How do they get started?
Yeah, just doing research, market research, and figuring out kind of what your niche is going to be. And then once you've got that figured out, I believe in a lot of visual branding and visual marketing. And so being able to truly tell your story and just continue to be authentic and answer people's questions, I really think goes a long way.
I've only got one more question left.
You go.
Is that you and your husband on the poster over your shoulder?
Yes. It is. And
that looks like a country music album cover.
It does.
We get comments all the time. People are like, oh, your Yellowstone picture. And I'm like, well, actually, that was our engagement photos. So we just got some new photos done recently. They're on our website now. But yes, that's one of my favorite photos. And I love the ladies at the farmers market of the older generation. They're always like, is he a country music singer? Is that Tim McGraw? And I'm like, no. Not Tim McGraw, but it's a captivating photo that just kind of catches people's eyes at the farmers market. And if you could get people to slow down and talk to you, that's kind of the best way to always just engage with them.
I love that. Well, Jordan, thanks for joining us. Before we let you go, you mentioned your website. How can our listeners connect with you if they want to hear more about your story or follow along with your journey?
Yes. So our website is ClassenMercantile.com. So that's CLASSEN mercantile.com. And then we're on Facebook and Instagram as well.
Awesome. Well, Jordan, thanks for sharing your story with us and our listeners today. It is truly inspiring.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's always fun to have those conversations. We appreciate them being a guest of the podcast. But Delaney, it's time for markets. What's happening this week?
Yeah, definitely a lot of lackluster headlines this week. Markets didn't have a lot of fresh news to chew on, but trade and weather seem to be the two major fundamental factors markets are watching. Neither of those two, though, posted major updates this week outside of a few small speculations. Looking at the trade side, Secretary Bessent told reporters earlier this week when pressed on trade, the administration has between 15 and 17 active trade negotiations going on, but none yet have created tangible headlines for the market to grab onto. A lot of optimism around U.S.-China trade negotiations following a statement from China late in the week confirming President Trump has reached out to start trade negotiations. This was supported by some Chinese export sales this week, being listed as a primary buyer for soybeans. However, outside of those weekly export headlines weren't anything to write home about, pretty much in line with trade expectations and fairly neutral. May 1st serves as first notice date for May contracts, which has added some volatility to the markets, but not enough really here to push grains outside of their current range. So not much going on yet in the grain markets, but cattle hit new records this week with cash cattle coming in at $220. We have seen this continue to be the case here for the last few weeks, putting in new cash highs in the cattle markets. Heading into summer grilling season, Tanner, your steaks might be getting a little more expensive if you haven't already pre-bought some.
It's a good thing my freezer's full, and we hope your freezer is full, listeners, as well. We appreciate you, as always, tuning in to our podcast and watching us on your favorite social media platform. If you haven't followed us somewhere, make sure you go do that.
Absolutely. You can find us on all major social media sites, and be sure to tune in with us next week. Michelle and I are hitting the ground in Washington, D.C. to chat with some top legislators about different issues impacting the business of agriculture.
You never take me on any of these fun trips, but listeners, we'll all be back to see you and talk to you next week. But for this week, what do you say, Delaney? Should we let them go?
Let's let them go.